A quiet crisis is unfolding inside Donald Trump's inner circle, and it isn't being driven by the media or political opponents. It's coming from something far more dangerous to them, a private recording they never believed would exist. A secret audio tape has reportedly surfaced, and what's allegedly captured on it has sent Trump's advisors into full panic mode because it threatens to undo years of carefully controlled silence. For a long time, Trump's political and legal operation was built on one assumption above all others, that private conversations would stay private. Meetings behind closed doors were treated as safe spaces where strategy could be discussed freely, where risks could be weighed openly, and where loyalty was assumed without question. The belief was simple. As long as no one recorded anything and everyone stayed quiet, they could survive investigations, lawsuits, and scandals, no matter how intense they became. That belief appears to have been catastrophically wrong. According to multiple reports, a recording made during one of those supposedly secure meetings is now in the hands of prosecutors. And what makes this situation so explosive isn't just that a tape exists, it's what's allegedly on it. This isn't described as casual conversation or routine legal planning. Sources say the discussion captured on the recording goes directly into territory that prosecutors view as criminal. This is not about another bad news cycle or another controversy Trump can dismiss as political noise. This is about potential evidence that could fundamentally reshape several ongoing criminal cases. Prosecutors don't just need to show that questionable actions occurred. They need to prove intent. They need to show that people knew what they were doing was wrong and chose to do it anyway. And few things demonstrate intent more clearly than recorded conversations where plans are openly discussed. The meeting where this recording was allegedly made took place at Mar-a-Lago in the summer of 2023. Reports say it included Trump, senior advisors, and at least one attorney, along with others whose identities haven't been publicly confirmed. One of the people in that room is believed to have secretly recorded the conversation, either out of fear, self-protection, or both. That detail alone has deeply shaken Trump's inner circle. Recording a meeting like this isn't something someone does casually. It suggests that at least one participant was worried enough about legal exposure to preserve proof of what was being discussed. That kind of decision isn't political, it's personal. At the time of the meeting, Trump was already under extraordinary legal pressure. Multiple investigations were active or looming, including cases involving classified documents, election interference January 6th, and financial misconduct. His team was constantly juggling legal defense, public messaging, and internal damage control. Strategy meetings were frequent, and discussions often centered on how to manage evidence, witnesses, and cooperation with investigators. In theory, those conversations should stay within the bounds of lawful defense strategy. But according to people familiar with the recording, this meeting did not. Sources say the audio allegedly captures Trump and his advisors talking about how to deal with individuals who had information that could be damaging to Trump's cases. The discussion reportedly included identifying which witnesses might be pressured or influenced and how their cooperation with prosecutors could be discouraged. More troubling still, there are claims that parts of the conversation acknowledge that certain actions being considered would cross legal lines, but that taking those risks might be necessary. If that's accurate, prosecutors aren't dealing with vague implications or circumstantial clues. They're dealing with people explaining their thinking out loud. The existence of this recording has completely shattered trust within Trump's operation. If one person in that room was recording, then every other private conversation suddenly feels unsafe. Advisors are now wondering who else might have protected themselves the same way, and whether there are more recordings they don't know about. This kind of fracture isn't new in Trump's world. Loyalty has a long track record of holding firm until the threat of prison becomes real. When personal consequences come into focus, alliances tend to collapse quickly. That pattern appears to be repeating. Everyone who was present at that meeting now faces serious questions. Were they part of discussions that crossed into illegal territory? Did they act on decisions made during that conversation? And how will prosecutors view their involvement if the recording is authenticated and introduced as evidence? What makes this situation especially dangerous is that planning or discussing illegal acts can itself constitute a crime, even if those plans are never carried out. Conspiracy and obstruction charges don't require success, only agreement and intent. Trump's legal team is already stretched thin fighting battles in multiple courts. But if prosecutors determine that this recording shows efforts to interfere with investigations while those investigations were ongoing, it introduces an entirely new and far more serious problem. Judges take alleged obstruction extremely seriously, especially when it happens during active prosecutions. It signals not just misconduct, but a willingness to corrupt the legal process itself. And unlike past allegations that relied on testimony or document trails, this evidence is different. Recordings are hard to explain away. They don't forget details. They don't change their stories. If the audio is real and admissible, it becomes one of the most powerful tools prosecutors could hope for. That's why this moment feels different. This isn't speculation layered on speculation. This is the possibility of direct evidence that could change the trajectory of Trump's legal battles in ways his team may no longer be able to control. The real danger of this recording isn't just what it captures, but what it proves. Prosecutors spend months, sometimes years, trying to reconstruct intent from fragments, emails, text messages, financial trails, secondhand testimony. That work is slow, complicated, and always open to doubt. But a recording where people explain what they want done and why collapses that uncertainty almost instantly. According to reports from people briefed on the contents, this meeting went far beyond general legal discussions. The conversation allegedly shifted towards specific witnesses who were either already cooperating with investigators or were expected to be contacted soon. Names were reportedly mentioned, situations were evaluated, and the discussion centered on how to limit the damage those individuals could cause. At first, parts of the conversation were allegedly framed in cautious language, phrasing that could be interpreted as routine legal advice or witness preparation. But sources say that restraint didn't last. As the discussion continued, the language reportedly became more direct and less careful. At one point, Trump is said to have grown impatient with the ambiguity and pushed for clarity about the real objective, making sure certain people did not fully cooperate with prosecutors. That shift matters legally. There is a clear line between lawful defense strategy and criminal obstruction. You are allowed to prepare witnesses. You are allowed to remind people of their rights. You are not allowed to pressure, reward, or intimidate someone into withholding truthful information from investigators. According to what's been reported, the conversation crossed that line. The recording allegedly includes discussions about providing financial assistance to certain individuals under the guise of legal support, with the unspoken understanding that continued loyalty was expected in return. It also reportedly includes remarks about consequences for those who had already chosen to cooperate, language that prosecutors could interpret as retaliatory or threatening. If those details are confirmed, this recording becomes more than just damaging. It becomes foundational. It provides evidence not only of attempted witness tampering, but of a broader pattern of behavior aimed at interfering with lawful investigations. That's why legal experts have described this kind of evidence as rare and devastating. It's one thing to argue that prosecutors are inferring intent. It's another thing entirely when intent is stated outright. When juries hear defendants discuss actions they know are illegal, explanations about misunderstanding or poor judgment become very hard to sell. Another critical factor here is that this wasn't a private conversation protected by attorney-client privilege. Multiple non-lawyers were reportedly present, and the discussion allegedly involved planning future actions rather than reviewing past conduct. Privilege does not apply when legal advice is used to facilitate crimes, and it does not apply when third parties are involved in the discussion. That makes it far more likely that the recording could be admitted as evidence. Once word of the recording reached Trump's legal and political teams, the fallout was immediate. Trust began to evaporate. Meetings became tense. People started choosing their words carefully if they spoke at all. The unspoken question hanging over every interaction was simple. Who recorded that meeting, and why? Reports indicate that several individuals who were present have since retained their own criminal defense attorneys. That alone signals trouble. When everyone shares the same interests, they share lawyers. When people start worrying about their own exposure, they separate. It's a quiet but unmistakable sign that unity is breaking down. Prosecutors appear to have recognized that vulnerability quickly. Multiple reports suggest that individuals connected to the meeting have been approached about cooperating. That means prosecutors are offering a choice: tell the truth and potentially receive leniency, or stay silent and risk being charged with crimes that may already be documented on tape. That kind of pressure changes calculations fast. When prosecutors can play back a recording and say they already know what was discussed, the leverage is enormous. Cooperation stops feeling like betrayal and starts feeling like survival. This situation follows a familiar pattern in Trump's orbit. Loyalty holds until the consequences become personal. Then priorities shift. We've seen it before with longtime associates who once seemed unbreakable, only to distance themselves or cooperate when prison time became a real possibility. The pattern is repeating, and the recording is accelerating it. Inside Trump's operation, paranoia has reportedly taken hold. Advisors are questioning past meetings, replaying conversations in their heads, wondering whether other discussions could be interpreted as criminal if examined closely. There's fear that this recording may not be the only one. And once that fear sets in, it's almost impossible to contain. At the same time, a divide is forming between advisors who want to protect themselves and those who remain fiercely loyal to Trump. The hardliners are pushing for a strategy of denial, attack the recording, question its authenticity, claim it's taken out of context. But that approach becomes harder to maintain when the evidence is audio and when forensic analysis can verify voices, timestamps, and chain of custody. Trump himself has reportedly clashed with his legal team over how to handle the situation. He wants to dismiss the recording as fake or manipulated. His lawyers, according to reports, have warned that such claims are unlikely to succeed if the recording can be authenticated. That tension between political instincts and legal reality is creating serious dysfunction. When a defendant stops trusting his own lawyer's advice, it usually signals deeper trouble ahead. Legal strategy requires discipline and restraint. Political instinct often demands confrontation and denial. Those two approaches are now colliding inside Trump's defense. The recording also presents a strategic nightmare. If Trump's team admits the conversation happened but claims it was misunderstood, they still have to explain why the language sounds the way it does. If they deny it happened, prosecutors can respond with forensic proof. And if they refuse to engage at all, they risk appearing evasive in front of judges who are already watching closely. Some lawyers connected to Trump's cases are reportedly considering stepping away altogether. Being associated with a case where recorded evidence suggests ongoing criminal conduct is a risk many attorneys don't want to take. That kind of attrition further weakens an already strained defense operation. And the consequences don't stop in the courtroom. Politically, the existence of this recording undercuts Trump's central narrative that all charges against him are baseless and politically motivated. That argument becomes far harder to sustain when prosecutors can play a tape of Trump allegedly discussing illegal actions. For some voters, accusations can be dismissed as partisan attacks, documents can be debated, witnesses can be discredited, but recordings are different. They allow people to hear the words themselves, and once that happens, deniability evaporates. This recording doesn't just add to Trump's legal troubles, it reshapes them. It creates new exposure, fractures alliances, and forces everyone involved to make choices they hoped they'd never have to face. And as more details emerge, the pressure on Trump's inner circle is only going to intensify. As the fallout spreads, the weight of this recording is beginning to settle on everyone connected to it, not just Trump himself. Each person who was present at that meeting now faces a stark calculation about their own future. This is no longer about loyalty, politics, or public messaging. It's about legal exposure and personal survival. When prosecutors obtain a recording like this, it becomes a central piece of leverage. They don't need to guess who knew what or when. They can identify voices, match statements to timelines, and cross-reference what was said with subsequent actions. That allows them to build a narrative that's not speculative, but documented. For those who were in the room, the risk is compounded by the fact that prosecutors don't need to prove everyone acted on the plan. Simply agreeing to it or helping advance it in any way can be enough to trigger conspiracy charges. Silence isn't protection in that scenario. It can actually be evidence. This is why separate legal counsel has become the norm among Trump's advisors. Each individual now has to consider whether staying aligned with Trump benefits them at all. If prosecutors are offering cooperation deals, the incentive structure changes dramatically. The first person to come forward often gets the best terms. The last one is left holding the consequences. That dynamic creates quiet chaos. People begin second-guessing each other. Trust erodes. Conversations become guarded. Every interaction is filtered through the fear that someone else is already cooperating or preparing to do so. At the same time, prosecutors are likely using the recording to widen their scope. Once you establish evidence of obstruction or witness tampering, it opens the door to examining every related action more closely. Phone calls, emails, financial transactions, and timing all become more significant when viewed through the lens of criminal intent. The recording also strengthens the argument that alleged misconduct wasn't accidental or isolated. It supports a theory of ongoing behavior, a willingness to interfere with investigations rather than comply with them. That's a powerful narrative in court, especially when jurors are deciding whether a defendant acted knowingly. From a legal standpoint, this kind of evidence doesn't just help prosecutors prove a case, it helps them defeat defenses before they're even raised. Claims of misunderstanding, miscommunication, or bad advice lose credibility when a defendant's own words suggest awareness of wrongdoing. That's why this recording could influence multiple cases at once. If it references efforts to interfere with different investigations, prosecutors may be able to introduce it across proceedings to show a consistent pattern. That kind of crossover evidence is rare, and when it exists, it significantly increases the chances of conviction. The political implications are just as serious. Trump's campaign strategy has relied heavily on framing his legal problems as partisan attacks. That message resonates with his core supporters, but it becomes far less effective when the evidence is auditory rather than theoretical. Independent voters and undecided Republicans tend to view recordings differently than accusations. Hearing someone's voice discussing questionable actions has a psychological impact that documents and headlines don't. It feels immediate, it feels real, and it's much harder to dismiss. Donors are reportedly taking notice. Campaigns depend on confidence, not just ideology. When legal exposure starts to look uncontrollable, financial support often becomes more cautious. Even loyal backers begin to wonder whether they're investing in a viable candidate or an ongoing legal crisis. Inside Trump's operation, the strain is visible. Advisors are split between those urging aggressive counterattacks and those advocating caution. The first group wants to discredit the recording entirely, regardless of the risks. The second group understands that attacking verifiable evidence can backfire badly in court. That internal conflict is slowing decision-making at a time when speed and clarity matter most. Every move now carries legal consequences, and mistakes made in public messaging can be used in filings and hearings. There's also the issue of timing. As prosecutors analyze the recording, they're likely preparing to introduce it strategically, not immediately. That means additional details may surface gradually, through court documents, motions, or testimony. Each revelation increases pressure on those involved and reduces their options. For Trump, the challenge is especially severe. He's accustomed to controlling the narrative, dominating media coverage, and overwhelming opponents with volume. But legal proceedings don't operate that way. Courts are slow, methodical, and resistant to theatrics. Evidence matters more than rhetoric. If this recording is authenticated and admitted, Trump won't be arguing against political opponents. He'll be arguing against his own words. And that's a battle defendants rarely win. The psychological toll on those around him shouldn't be underestimated either. Living under constant threat of indictment changes behavior. People become risk-averse. They avoid involvement. They distance themselves. That isolation weakens leadership and fractures organizations. The ripple effects extend even further. Witnesses who were previously hesitant may feel emboldened to cooperate once they know prosecutors have corroborating audio. Others may decide that coming forward now is safer than waiting and being implicated later. This creates momentum, and momentum in criminal investigations is difficult to stop. Each cooperating witness strengthens the case, which encourages more cooperation, which further solidifies prosecutors' position. What makes this moment particularly significant is that it didn't arise from external surveillance or investigative fishing. It came from inside the room. That fact alone undermines the idea that this is all the result of political targeting. When evidence comes from within an inner circle, it tells a different story, one about fear, self-preservation, and breakdowns in trust. As the legal process moves forward, the existence of this recording will shape nearly every strategic decision. Motions will be filed with it in mind. Testimony will be measured against it. Plea negotiations will be influenced by it. For Trump's advisors, the window to make choices is narrowing. Once prosecutors formally present the recording in court, leverage shifts even further in their favor. Waiting may feel loyal, but it may also be costly. This is the point where many people in Trump's orbit have faced the same question in the past: protect Trump or protect yourself. History suggests that when the stakes are high enough, that question answers itself. As this situation moves forward, the implications of this recording continue to expand far beyond a single meeting or a single case. What prosecutors appear to have now is not just another piece of evidence, but a lens through which they can reinterpret everything that followed. Actions that once seemed ambiguous may now be examined in light of what was allegedly discussed behind closed doors. If investigators can show that decisions made after that meeting align with what was talked about on the recording, it strengthens the argument that those conversations weren't hypothetical or idle talk. It suggests coordination. It suggests follow-through. And that's where legal exposure grows rapidly for everyone involved. For Trump, the risk isn't limited to whether this recording is damaging on its own. It's whether it allows prosecutors to argue that he continued engaging in obstructive behavior even while under indictment or investigation. Courts view that kind of conduct as especially serious. It signals not just alleged wrongdoing, but disregard for the legal process itself. Judges tend to respond harshly to defendants who appear to interfere with investigations into their own conduct. Bail conditions, sentencing decisions, and evidentiary rulings are all influenced by perceptions of compliance or defiance. If prosecutors can convincingly argue that Trump was attempting to undermine active cases, it could affect how judges handle every aspect of his proceedings. The people around Trump face equally difficult decisions. Remaining silent may no longer be neutral. In some cases, it can be interpreted as participation. Prosecutors don't need every person involved to take overt action. Agreement, encouragement, or facilitation can be enough. That reality weighs heavily on anyone who was present or later involved. As more individuals seek separate legal counsel, the possibility of coordinated defense strategies diminishes. Each lawyer's duty is to their own client, not to Trump or the group as a whole. That inevitably leads to diverging interests, conflicting accounts, and increased willingness to cooperate. From a broader perspective, this moment underscores how fragile loyalty becomes when legal consequences are real. Public displays of unity often mask private fear. When recordings surface and prosecutors hold leverage, principles tend to give way to pragmatism. Politically, Trump may continue to frame the situation as unfair or exaggerated, and for his most committed supporters, that framing will likely hold. But elections aren't decided solely by base voters. They're decided by margins, by people who weigh credibility and evidence more cautiously. For those voters, recordings carry a different kind of weight. There is also the question of precedent. If this recording becomes central to a successful prosecution, it reinforces the idea that power does not place someone beyond accountability. It sends a message that even the most insulated political figures are vulnerable when those inside their own circle decide to protect themselves. The story is still developing, and much remains unknown. Prosecutors are continuing to analyze the recording, verify its authenticity, and determine how it fits into their broader strategy. Details may emerge slowly, through court filings and testimony rather than headlines. What is clear, however, is that this recording has already changed the landscape. It has altered relationships, reshaped legal strategies, and introduced uncertainty where confidence once existed. The inner circle that depended on silence is now confronting the consequences of assuming silence was guaranteed. As more pressure builds, the choices facing Trump's advisors will only become more stark: cooperation or resistance, distance or loyalty, risk now or greater risk later. These are not theoretical decisions. They are immediate and deeply personal. For Trump himself, the challenge ahead is unlike any he has faced before. Messaging, influence, and political instincts are less effective when confronted with recorded evidence. Courts operate on proof, not narratives, and recordings tend to speak louder than any defense strategy built around denial. Whether this recording ultimately leads to new charges, expanded cases, or pivotal testimony remains to be seen. But its existence alone has already had a profound impact. It has exposed fractures, heightened scrutiny, and accelerated processes that were once moving more slowly. This is no longer just about allegations or investigations. It's about how evidence reshapes power, loyalty, and accountability when the words spoken in private no longer stay private. And as this unfolds, one reality is becoming harder to ignore. When people believe they are untouchable, they often speak most freely. And when those words are preserved, they can become the very thing that changes everything.